Oh, Lord, we're good. Thank you all. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our third meeting of the Performance Funding Work Group. It's good to have everybody here. We're going to cover a lot today, and we're going to move through fast. We're going to have some decision points, so hope you guys are ready. We sent out material for you to look at, to be ready to respond to, so hopefully you are able to respond to that today as we go into this. With that in mind, Heather, could you please call the roll?
President Acappo?
Here.
Representative Vol?
Here.
Senator Bledsoe? Here. President Bradley?
Here.
Representative Gray?
Present.
President Caboni?
Here.
President Capaluto?
Here.
And here, you're representing as proxy. Yes, I'll be representing as proxy. Senator Gibbons?
Here.
Mr. Hicks?
Here.
Representative Nicole?
Here.
Senator McDaniel?
Here.
President McFadden?
Here.
President Morgan?
Here.
Senator Neal? President Patterson?
Here.
And Quarles?
Here.
Representative Ruby?
Here.
Ms. Short Thompson? Here. President Thompson Chair?
Here.
Representative Tipton?
Here.
Senator West?
Here.
No quorum.
Thank you, everybody. We do have a quorum. We have the minutes from the last meeting. I'll take a motion for approval. Got a first and a second.
I'll second.
And then we got discussion. Oh,
Let's do that, made the motion. Senator McDaniel, second by President Short Thompson.
any discussion, any changes, deletions, additions? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We're gonna move now to the guiding principles. We promised you that we were gonna have, last time we did look at them all and got feedback, and we talked with HCM, our staff, and so we have today, we're gonna put to you with hopefully discussion. Is it not working? Other way? No?
I'll try.
There you go. You can, okay, I should go over the overview. Today, we're gonna do guiding principles, the proposed ones. We're gonna ask you to approve these, or if you have any additions or take, hopefully you're ready to make those. We're gonna talk about the student success outcomes. We were asked to bring back to you what I consider to be now brag points. And we'll show you some of those, and any questions we'll try to answer. Then we're gonna have HCM here to go over what's happening out there in the nation around performance funding, outcomes-based funding. And please be ready to seriously ask them deep questions, and we can even go into more of that next time if we need to. We're gonna also bring to you, as I promised last time, goals that people have proposed that were here before. We had asked folk to think about what should be kept and what should be not kept or added. We're going to get to that. If we're lucky enough, we're going to ask you to approve those, whatever we decide on. If we can't get to that point, we will bring them back like we did principal the next time, with almost an immediacy of asking you to have thought about it and then to vote on it. We're going to go to the next steps. Bottom line, today's meeting, we're going to get into a lot of meat. The next meetings, we're going to be purely in meat. We're going to be talking about metrics. We're going to talk about directions. And we have decision points that we'll put up on the board today that you have to think about for where we're going to go. So please understand that we're purely in action mode and be ready, hopefully, to respond and act to those. So the guiding principles, what we had is we looked at and we sent items to the campuses to look at it. You all received the survey last week to look at what some of the things that were asked. And I know you have looked at it and ready to talk about it today. But what we did, as promised, we combined those items that were the same, basically, are very similar. Worked with HCM to see what else is out there and how we could better operationally define those. And so what we're bringing to you today now is are the proposed principles. I'm gonna go through these fairly quickly, but then obviously you got chances to ask questions or state positions on any of these. One is to recognize mission differences. The funding model will account for difference in mission, capacity, students served, and community context, and provide pathways for all institutions to be rewarded based on outcomes that reflect their unique roles and contributions. So hopefully we captured all those things that everybody has said. In that one, we're going to talk about outcomes based as the principle. We'll provide incentives for improved institutional and student performance by establishing an explicit link between the attainment of desired state outcomes and allocation of available resources. Reasonably stable. The funding model will provide reasonably stable, predictable, and transparent funding allocations that support institutional planning and capacity building, regardless of fluctuations in overall state appropriations. Now, before I move to the, anybody have any questions over that or disagree with any of those or? Yes, but
The document that was distributed to us and we were asked to make comments relative to is not the document that's on the screen.
no, y'all asked us last time to come back and bring our suggestions after looking at everything. That's what this time.
Okay, so when we get to the questions that you asked us to answer, we won't be commenting on this so much as the attachment A document.
That's right,
Okay.
but what we wanted to do with these is to take into account what people had already said with the idea that you're gonna bring comments back to those. You may have actually questions that was asked on the previous document we sent to you that may apply to these things.
I'm good, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood the process.
One comment on the term capacity building, it seems to kind of aim at how funds are used versus how they are earned. And we're here to talk about how they're earned. So that's just a comment. It's not a terribly important one.
I do have an answer, but Bill and Greg, I want you to comment if there is, when we looked at the word capacity, a part of capacity is on the earning and the distribution, right? Part of what I see, if we look at mission and we look at the capacity of any institution, and later on, I'll say this when we talk about, I'd like to see some sort of a marker or a metric that talks about regional and statewide excellence, right? And that, so how do you build capacity if you're in a rural community to do that, and how should funding be associated with that? So this is a principle and not necessarily a goal. So John, I guess my reference to yours is, are you seeing this in the way you responded as some sort of a goal of the model or a principle?
No, it was more about, we've stayed away from directing what the use of the funds will be for, right? We're aiming at the outcomes, we already got that. So that's my only comment, right?
I'll respond to that. A couple of our institutions have specifically said that they would like the funding model to be able to support institutional planning and capacity building. We're coming at it from the angle of they're having to rely, some of our institutions, increasingly on non-recurring funding because the performance funding dollars are non-recurring. And they're saying, well, that really, hamstrings us in terms of being able to plan for the future in terms of building new programs because those funds are non-recurring. And so that's more a statement about that, the institutions would like to be able to know that they can count on those funds. And so that's how that got incorporated into this principle of reasonably stable. We already had a reasonably stable principle in the past, but we broadened that to say that, those funding allocations need to be transparent. They need to be funds that the institutions can count.
But John, I think your point is, and I don't want to lose this point, Mr. Secretary, is that if capacity could indicate anything that tells you how to spend those funds, that's your question, right?
Yeah, I think Bill's explanation is a good one.
Okay. Everybody good with these? The next one, data driven. This is obvious, but we wanted to have it as a principle. Funding model will rely on data They're valid and reliable, readily available, and can be verified when necessary. Public value, this popped up in lots of places. The funding model will incentivize outcomes that advance Kentucky's workforce, economy, civic well-being, and long-term competitiveness. An opportunity, the funding model will provide every institution with an opportunity to earn performance funding based on outcomes produced. So those are what we're bringing to you, and Chair McDaniel, you may have some that you looked at, or any of you from last week. We told you we would bring you 5, 6, or 7 that kind of captures a lot of what we've heard. And put them in some sort of operational definitional order for you, and that's what we're bringing to you. But we're not saying that you don't have others you want to include or may not want to include these. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thanks, Sharon. I'm actually gonna submit just a document, maybe we could pass it around. And I really like the way you are going with this. I think, since we left the meeting, we had originally proposed no changes actually into the guiding principles at U of L, but based on the conversations we had last time, we kind of went back and thought about this and, number one, to kind of, streamline the principles down to a manageable number, but, some of the things that I guess, we heard, which and I don't want to prolong a lot of conversation around, different versions of it, but I think simplicity and clarity was something that we heard loud, pretty loud from folks about the current model, that it's not very easy to understand. And it's certainly, from our perspective, to communicate that even to our own deans and our program heads, there's a level of complexity, of course, around it that it's very hard for people to understand. So I think the one we had was simplicity and clarity. Number 2 is transparency. I think, again, because of the lack of simplicity and clarity in it, the transparency was an issue. And then how do we, build the model so that it's easier to work through and to calculate, how values are being assigned and how monies are being appropriated. So I think some of these are fitting into the ones you have up there.
Right.
The third one I would say, though, is a little different, because I think, you would argue that we don't have a performance funding model. We have an outcomes-based model. And in that, we're looking at outcomes across the sector and we're comparing institutions to it, but balancing a share of output would actually in performance from within, right? If an institution is making inroads on retention, or it's comparing more to itself, so it's rewarding behaviors within the university or college moving forward. So it's sort of, rather than, taking the sector average and using that as the base, because if the sector does poorly, then everybody is actually changed. But if somebody is performing well relative to themselves, it really is a measure of performance. And again, I know this is, a different.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah, you can.
You're absolutely right. One of the decision points we're gonna have to make on these, as far as a goal goes, is exactly what you're saying. So what you're saying is really pointing to more of what is the goal that you want to accomplish here.
I think we want to improve, right? We want to improve.
That's right. That's right.
Everyone to improve.
Yeah, so in this, just to respond to that, that's why the first one, if we go back to it, is making it clear it's outcomes based, right? And so that was a little squishy before, I think, around performance, because part of the goals should be around performing, right? And how you then get funding for that based on whether it's outcomes purely based on that, or if you're actually judging against yourself in that process. So one of the decision points that we're going to have here today is exactly what you're posting.
And then the other one was like fiscal stability and predictability. I know we all don't like huge variances in our allocations because we make plans around them. And, part of that is, there's got to be stability in the model. I know when the original model was rolled out, there was no new money added. And
That's why we have that one right there.
Yeah.
And we're stable.
And I think, part of maybe what some people around the table don't realize is that, when you think of back 20 years ago, there was actually more funding. available to higher ed than now, and as a percentage, universities have seen less state appropriations as a percentage of their overall budget. So for instance, at U of L, ours has gone from nearly 20% down to 10% of our overall budget. And I know this is the same for all my colleagues in the room. And so I think, you know, it's reasonable that we need to kind of be aware of that we're all under challenges. And then the fifth one we just added was workforce alignment and affordability, which I think, you know, fits in again.
It's there, and we even go in more detail than that, if we get to the goal, it makes it much more specific.
Percentage of funding, not yes, it has gone up, but university sides have gone up exponentially and the state side can't keep up. So we also need to recognize that before you just go laying the blame on the General Assembly.
No, I'm not blaming the General Assembly. I'm just saying that the facts, you know, are because of the decisions that had to be made. There was there is a real reduction in real terms and take inflationary pressures into it. I'm not blaming the General Assembly at all. I'm just stating the facts.
So what you're, after looking at everything, and Travis, thank you, that's where I was at too. You're proposing overall, because I think we captured everything, but the simplicity and clarity, transparent sort of principle, right?
And sort of the performance versus
Right.
outcomes.
And we will get to that one in the goal.
Mr. President.
Good.
On the public value, I certainly agree what we do has to have public value. My question is, on some of these parts of public value, are we able to measure those components of public value? That's just a question. How do
Well,
you measure things like that?
You are asking a $10 question. I want to be clear in the way I perceive this. A principle of thinking about that's the direction we want to go and a particular goal when we're going to get to measurements. That's where the metrics come out of, right?
Okay.
So if there is a public value sort of proxy, then you can measure. But the argument around principles, should we actually have the principles of having any funding model, this one or anything else that's driving what is needed for the state, right? The idea that is it powerful enough to not only kind of get us to a place where we're building the workforce and the economy, but that we're doing things like civic well-being, among others, long-term competitiveness. The argument is performance funding, when it comes to campuses, their jobs with that money, and not to be specific, but their job is that money, with that money is to provide all of those, whether we have a metric that measures this or not in the performance funding model. So a principle states what we ultimately want to see. I would argue that one of the items that we haven't explicitly defined is this idea of educational attainment, right? The 60 by 30. This may not be in the model, but that is our North Star, and that's why we're doing some of this work. So I don't know if I'm explaining this good enough or not, but I do see a principle as some overarching values, a little more than an operational item. That can be operational ability. What I have here is, just to kind of move on, is with Jerry's input, there's one thing that we haven't captured here is around this simplicity, clarity, transparency piece. And I do agree that is a principle. Okay. Any other thoughts that people want to add to take a look?
Forgive me. Are we commenting on the document that you sent or on this one?
It's either one, actually. I'm asking you now to, based on what you were saying, what else you have to offer? And that's what Jerry just did based on what was sent around, what he did.
Okay, so the biggest thing that I would like to comment on, and you've actually addressed here in the outcomes-based section of it, you removed the examples of what outcomes-based meant. If we had those in there, I felt like there were more examples, truthfully, that I felt were more goals. But with those in there, I felt like there were some additions that needed to be made, so I reserve that comment. The other one It is in addition to this. And I recognize that these guiding principles are really focused on the model that's central to the funding. But when I look at these guiding principles, the one fact that I see just a glaring hole is there is no statement like students are the core of everything we do. This model exists to serve the students of the Commonwealth. Something that tells us that the model is about more than finance. It's about young people who are counting on us for their futures. And so, in my opinion, that's a glaring omission.
I think that is an excellent point. We tried to get for the student performance, but your point is really a principle. And I like it. It is a value statement.
Mr. President, it could even be a mission statement
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
of what we're trying to do.
I personally, everybody else got input. It's just not my thoughts, but I actually that. We could add that in around the public value piece. Unless you're arguing that you think it should be a standalone by itself, for instance.
I mean, my opinion is it is in the core of what we're doing. But I'm open to however the committee would want to proceed, but I think that it certainly is something that needs to be at the fore.
Anybody have any thoughts about that? We are going to add the simplicity one based on where Jerry is going. Any thoughts on this?
I'll speak briefly to that one, Chris. I think your idea is excellent, and I would love to keep us at the 6 number if possible. So make it student and public value with the word student first is a possibility that would work as a thought. I want to jump back though. I want to appreciate the fact that you put a document out there. Sticking your neck out is always something that moves groups forward, but it tends to be a little painful. So thank you for doing that. In saying that, I like rolling the simplicity and clarity and transparency piece in some fashion. At the same time, as we do move towards simplicity, I think we're wise to acknowledge that the complexity of the formula, which it's a complex formula, but the complexity that we currently have provides great benefit in buffering seismic change in one direction or the other. So in the simplicity mindset, if there's a way to synthesize the complexity that provides such stability into I don't want to say a 30,000 foot level, but a 10,000 foot level simplicity that we can communicate better among ourselves and to the public. I'd love to be able to eat my cake and have it too. It's hard to do.
Yeah.
But if we could have the simplicity and the beauty of simplicity with the comfort of the complexity that provides stability, we'd be well served if we could have both. Now, having said that, I want to also, in acknowledging the things I like, I want to challenge you on number 4, because this is from a legislative perspective. Maintaining the 3-year rolling average and allowing earned performance distributions to roll into base appropriations does provide fiscal stability, but it certainly creates a challenge for us to fund the pot for performance if we roll it into the base every time we do it. So you're going to find some pushback from me if we move forward on conversation around number 4.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
And I will point out that is going to be a decision point that we make. It's not a principle. It's a particular goal that you may have. Yes, Kate.
I wonder if, to get at Senator McDaniel's point, student and public value, do we add the words after Kentucky's, but student success before workforce? So it's the first thing that we're focused on in Kentucky.
Good point. Yes, we can. You see what she's saying there. So I like that. Yeah.
Right.
And if we go back, I was going to say after the first one, I want to show how we can get Jerry's in
I think
so in reasonably stable. If you notice, we have reasonably stable, predictable, and transparent. So we are capturing some of that in there where we probably need to add a word is simplicity.
Can you just do it, since it says reasonably and it's a principle, can't you just say reasonably stable and simplistic?
Yeah. Yeah.
Cause it's a principle, it's like a guiding star.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I just want to make sure, and we don't have wordsmith this to death, but I think Senator Gibbons makes another point. These models, although we can talk about it as simplistic as we can, it's fairly complicated when you add some of these metrics in there that you're measuring, right? So we have, I guess I want to know what we talk of, what the simplistic means.
Yeah, that's a great question, because, you know, and I think to Senator Gibbons's point, you know, it's not simple what we're doing. And I guess from the standpoint of what I mean by simplicity is, I think where a lot of people get thrown off by is the weighting. Explaining the weighting, you know, particularly to different groups of folks, and to, you know, walk through that. But that could be replaced by just a different metric, you know, I mean, it's not to make it so dumbed down that it's on 4 or 5 things, you know, I think we all felt that 11 was a lot, but that, I think part of the complexity is the people understanding the weighting involved.
Are you
How
talking
the
about
calculations are done, because it's hard to see that.
You're talking about simply communicated.
Yeah, in some ways. I
Is
mean,
that's the word we're really talking about.
Understandable.
Being able to communicate it simply.
And not, certainly not to put myself in the shoes of any of you university leaders, because all you know my respect for each of you and the roles you play. But if you can stand in front of your faculty and each one of you say the same thing to your faculty about, hey, for us to succeed, this formula says that we've got to do A, B, and C. If you can stand in front of your KCPCS folks, and you can stand in front of your Eastern folks, and you could read the same paragraph to the people in the room, and they would all, wow, that's clear enough. I've got to have students in my classroom. I've got to have students progressing through my system. I've got to matter enough to the institution. Every time I walk into a gymnasium at a high school, I need to be wearing my EKU shirt or my pen, communicating the value of this, because enrollment matters. If the same paragraph could be read at every institution, that would be empowering, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So I do agree, and that's been, I think, the problem with the model before. It was hard to communicate it, right? We understood it somewhat, but it was hard to communicate it. So when I use the word simple, it's not about how the model is designed, but how we can actually formulate a way to have an elevator speech around it.
I think one comment here, so I think this notion around simplicity and transparency really has to reflect on the model we've had for the period of time, and that is, it is not just a performance funding model. The performance comes after the calculation of historical funding support, allocable resources. So the model first addresses historical funding, current funding, allocable resources before it ever contemplates performance. And so I think that one, Jerry, I don't want to speak for you, but I think it may be from a principle standpoint, if we're going to say it's outcomes based, then perhaps we should carve out what is performance and not contemplate what the balance of those things are, which does make the model simple, because then you get to post allocable resources calculation, which is we can all replicate that. We can all explain that part. It is very hard to reconcile the activity that happens prior to the performance.
And what I would ask you to do is to remember that conversation when we get to the goals and metrics, because that's where it comes into play, right? In that. In the principles, I'm going to argue, I'm going to make a suggestion so we can move on. So whereas the funding model will provide reasonably stable, predictable, simply communicated, and transparent funding. Can we add simply communicated in that and get where we need to go? Anybody disagree with that? Anything else anybody wants to add, delete, or discuss? Yes, sir.
I think after seeing the success of the performance funding, I think it would be criminal if we didn't at least speak to affordability.
And we are going to in the goals.
I think I would recommend it be, part of some kind of principle. President Bradley got that in.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. I agree. I was going to say affordability is the one missing. that you could add that somewhere into public value, maybe.
Yeah, go to the next
Next
slide.
slide. Somehow we could put affordable, so we're all getting at that.
That's student center, public value students.
Yeah, I would clearly put in this case, if you're gonna do that, I think you have to add another student piece to it, like student centered or student focused.
Read what we have under public value now.
It's, the funding model will incentivize outcomes that advance student success, Kentucky's workforce, economy, civic well-being, and long-term competitiveness.
Could you just add a comma after student success and put in affordability? Yeah.
You can.
That's not right.
That's where I was gonna go there with that, because that's where you're talking about affordability is about the student, right? I mean, that's where it operationalizes itself. We can make it about the institution, that's an affordable institution, but it depends on really the student that's coming to that institution.
I think it's probably important to ask Representative Bray if that says.
It does.
Is that?
Does that hit it for you? Yeah. We will add that. Anything else? Not that I want to move us on, but I want to move us on. Any other thoughts? Travis, would you tell them what we had?
Communicate, simply communicating.
We are, yeah.
As a new principle.
No, we're added it into the other one we mentioned a minute ago. I'm sorry.
Reasonably stable.
And reasonably stable.
Yeah, where it's after predictable, we're gonna put something communicators before we have and transparent.
Which one? This one.
Reasonably after predictable. Yeah. Travis, do you want to read off all the
Yeah.
ones we have?
In order to make it
For a vote?
More quick, I will just say, what changes have been made, all these will stay the same as you've seen them on both slides here, except for in, reasonably stable. We will add, it will say, the funding model will provide reasonably stable, predictable, easily communicated, and transparent funding allocations that support institutional planning and capacity building regardless of fluctuations in overall state appropriations. And then the other change is in the public value depth language, which would state that the funding model will incentivize outcomes that advance student success, affordability, Kentucky's workforce, economy, civic well-being, and long-term competitiveness.
Do you need a motion to adopt?
We do.
So move as read into record.
As amended. So we have a motion for adoption as amended. Do I have a second?
Second by Representative Tipton.
Okay, any discussion? All in favor? I think we have to do a roll call on this one. All in favor, Heather, please do the roll call.
Representative Capo,
Yes.
Representative Hall,
Yes.
Senator Bledsoe,
Yes.
President Bradley,
Yes.
Representative Bray,
Yes.
President Caboni,
Yes.
President Capaludo, yes. Senator Gibbons,
Yes.
Mr. Hicks,
Yes.
Representative DePaul,
Yes.
Senator McDaniel,
Yes.
President McFadden,
Yes.
President Morgan, Senator McNeil, President Patterson,
Yes.
President Quarles,
Yes.
Representative Rudy,
Aye.
President Short Thompson,
Yes.
Representative Tipton,
Yes.
Senator West.
Yes.
So passed. Thank you all very much. This was easy. But I want to go through some of the things y'all asked me for last time. I'm gonna make it a little bit quicker because we're running behind time a little bit. I just want to say one of the goals that we had was around affordability before that we operationalized, but didn't operationalize it clearly in the performance funding model. So anything that we're talking about here is around strategy, policies, things that have been put in place and with procedures, as well as the performance funding model. As you all know, the best way to get the outcomes you want is attaching your funding directly to the strategies and policies that you have in place. So make a long story short, what you have here is a measure that we do at CPE with the way we look at unmet need. And our campuses, you can see the numbers. Now I'll get to some summary slides here that'll make it really simple for you in a minute. But as you can see, that's been an area that we focused on heavily, both at our 2-year sectors and 4-year sectors. In other words, looking at it from that end is not concentrating heavily on how many scholarship dollars you got coming through the front door, but how to use a completion process to think about getting a student to that finish line. All of our campuses have an unmet need process in place and a metric, how they're looking at it, and we ask them to report that to us, and every year they do it in public forum about where they're at. And you can see the graphs. If you want more explanation, we're happy to go in great detail on each one of those. I don't plan on doing it now unless you're asking questions about it. Just know that that's the number you see on the screen for this past year for the unmet need of the students coming to us. And that's going to have a big play, if you will, on where we're at on debt reduction for our students. Any questions over this slide before we go?
Is this-
Yes.
Is this for first time students, what it was? Then you have adults over 25? Not those who are.
Yeah, yes, it's for all students,
So
but
the blue line's total, and then you've got the different populations there. We got orange with low income, first generations in green, and adult learners are the purple line there.
yeah, we have it stratified for you by those population groups. I don't know if you can read it. That close.
Well, I did, but
Yeah.
the top of it says first time students. So if you have a student who has stopped out, then comes back, do they count in 25 and older, or what's, are they counted? Is this just for the first time?
This is
For the first time students? Or is this for all students?
It's still the first time.
Still adult first time student. Yeah, they're all first time students.
If they're adults, are you saying if they stop out and come back?
Yeah.
Are we capturing that with this number?
We captured, it's not in this number. This is just.
It's just
this is
the-
based on our education. So this is just stratified based on all first time students, but we do have that.
We have that number. This is just what we actually measure the campuses on.
Mr.
But
President,
we
is
do
this
have
the
this.
average, is this an average number or median number? It's the average number, so you've got people all over the scale on this.
That's right. You have some paying nothing, and I'll give you that data here in a second.
Okay,
Would you like to see the other broken out?
well, I just want to make sure we don't just look at first time students.
No, we capture them all. Well, of course, each of the campuses have their own metrics, but we have a statewide metric that we ask them, and we don't do them all. We just have one, this is the one that we've identified around unmet need. When a student comes to you, no matter where they come to you from or where, how well are you paying attention to their particular outcomes and financial needs? Yes.
Can you define for everyone what available aid refers to?
So available aid, the overall calculation for unmet need, is cost of attendance, and then any kind of institutional aid, state aid, federal aid, or any kind of other, grants or scholarships that a student receives. So it should be all of that, basically subtract, and then, expected family contribution. And then all of that subtracted out of that overall cost.
Doesn't include loans.
No, it does not.
It does not include loans. Yeah. So if you look at debt at graduation over the last, what is this, 5 years we have up here, Trev? Over the last 5 years, debt at graduation is down 19%. I'm gonna give you another number here in a minute that's gonna throw this off. And I wished I hadn't used this slide, but the other slide, because you'll find, but you'll find out. That's right. You'll find out that, because this takes into account everybody. But if you find out those that actually have debt in the last 5 years, we reduced that amount of debt by 34%.
Ask one question, please.
Sure.
When you calculate the unmet need, how do you calculate in the amount that a parent will be putting into that? Is this off of the?
Travis, I want to hear you have the numbers now.
We use, the expected family contribution. So that's what's provided on the FAFSA, basically, when they do the FAFSA calculation for student need. And then that's just the dollar. So we use that along with all scholarships and grants to subtract out of that overall cost of attendance to get an individual, unmet need for each student. And then basically do the average from there. But we do include the expected family contribution, which will move to the SAI, so the student aid index with the newest FAFSA. So that's what we use kind of at that point.
But bottom line with this number, I want to keep up our campuses, almost everybody has a promise scholarship of some sort. They keep up with the actual dollars that they're going to need to get through. So even if the calculations on this or the debt load or the way we look at it, unmet need, bottom line, our campuses have, that's why you're going to see upward graduation and retention rates. Because they're focusing on this in a very completion manner and not an enrollment or what I call first time manner, which I have to go to the statement of that has helped us to really move this down.
President, this is just on bachelor's degree or graduate students included in this number.
This is only undergraduate. Undergraduate.
Graduates are higher. Gonna be higher.
Graduate be higher. That's right. And I think you hear a lot of people say, well, people graduate on $120,000 debt. You can't, not undergraduate. They're include medical school, law school. For us, we look at, since this model is driving undergraduate degrees currently, we're looking at it from that standpoint. This is what I'm really proud about, undergraduate enrollment overall. The last, once again, Travis, we're talking 5 years, you haven't changed it on the 5 years. Thank you. Just don't want to mess up here. Has been increased by 27%. Kentucky has been within the top 5 after COVID in enrollment increase. We were the first state to bounce back from COVID and enrollment increase. So heavily at our 2-year and 4-year institutions, you're going to see the different stratifications there. The research institutions are leading and overall in that regard. But as a whole, 4 and 2 years have been on an upward trajectory. We've had a couple of campuses that are on downward, but most are up, and this is a reflection of that. Yeah. Travis points out, and I think the legislators in this room appreciate this. There is a huge correlation, we granted, with when we started getting reinvested in from the legislature. So that undergraduate degrees and credentials are way up. We've got some news we're not ready to talk about yet, right?
Hopefully we'll have some good news soon.
Okay, even more good news coming this way that we don't want to tell you yet. But this has been an area that has been, Kentucky has been well recognized for it nationally in the last 5 years as far as the amount of degrees and credentials we put on the table. You have to remember, some of this, our COVID years, we're still in a downturn, but some of this was even when we had lower enrollment. I mean, lower people coming in from in the freshman year. So what you saw then was a huge, as a matter of fact, by comparison to other states, output from those getting through the system that we already had in the system.
Mr. President, on the enrollment trends, am I correct? Is that going against the national trend?
It is, and I don't know what we're gonna look like this fall, but you heard about the enrollment cliff and you heard it's gonna be big. If you predict out Kentucky's enrollment cliff, it's smaller than others, but we were even going against that. We've been going against the grain on all of those for the last many years. The item that we were down on, honestly, were the adult learners. Everybody was having a college going rate, that was an issue. But now we kicked that in gear in the last 2 years, and those have been significantly up at 4 and 2 years. But yes, sir, you're right. We've gone against the grain that other folks are doing. So you have to remember that we're going out of time. I'm sorry for all this stuff, but I love this enrollment student success stuff. But you have to also remember that to just even be flat in today's marketplace, you're kicking butt. Right? Period. Because many people are going that way, especially regional institutions, right? They're going down. So to go up, you're not only going against the grain, you're going against the grain twice. You're not flat, which is going against the grain, and you're going up. Yes, sir.
So I'm just curious, were you also looking at that from a, like a SEC versus ACC, like a regional capacity for?
We don't do it versus which athletic.
I didn't know,
but-
that's the
right,
easiest
but
way to say it.
we are Southern SREB.
Yes.
We look at it nationally, but we compare now ourselves, proud to say we're kicking butt in SEC. But we are now comparing ourselves nationally, but we look at it in all ways. Yeah, absolutely.
I sorry, do be a better
Yeah.
metric for that.
Yeah, and even when we did the Senate bill, they would give it to them, whatever it was, to look at whether we should do the vet school and all that stuff. We actually, a part of that was looking at how well those institutions are doing in SREB region as well as nationally, and had to be in the top 15% before we would even move forward in the SREB region. So almost everything we do now, as far as a metric, we are judging ourselves at the top with our goals, with our strategies, with everything else.
I think point on that is that, you know, our demographic data between 2026 and 2041 will decline by 9%
Yeah.
in high school graduates. So I think part of what the challenge for all of us in higher ed is to bring kids in from outside the Commonwealth as well, because, you know, if you bring them in, then a number of them will stay, a significant number, and that could make a difference from workforce development. So a lot of what we're all doing is strategies to bring students in, because neighboring states are in even worse shape. If you look at our neighboring states, Illinois, Tennessee is in a growth period, but Illinois, you know, Indiana, West Virginia, they're all in decline. So the reach has got to be large for us to bring folks in, because we have a great story to tell. Affordability, great place to live, you know.
And not, I'm glad Jerry went in detail here. I'm trying to rush too fast, I guess, and saying that 9%, that's what we're predicting, which is lower than other regions. The problem is that we're gonna have to hit this from all sides, and I would hope this model grabs that, such as adult learners, such as college going, a variety of other things to go against that 9% grain. We're already going against the grain that's up, but it's going to get more, and especially when you think about certain population groups, right?
What's the 9% number again?
9%, they're predicting that Kentucky is going to see a decrease in people coming to college by 9% over the next 15 years, college age.
High school.
High school, right? Yeah. Yeah, so we're gonna have to actually get the population that's not going to college to come to college. And I will say quickly, we've seen in the last few years, we've turned around, we stopped the slide of college. We had reduced in 10 years, like 11, 12 percentage points of young people coming out of high school going to college. In the last 2 years, we stopped the slide, and now we're going back up, right?
And we have a weird thing happening in 2029, where we'll have a dip. And you know, usually we'll have about 18,000 schools going to higher education in Kentucky. It'll actually drop to 14,000 that year, and then it'll come back up again close to 18,000, but then it'll level off and start to decline.
Yeah.
And it's just the population.
Graduation rates, we're up 14.8 percentage points, not percentage points. Remember how powerful it is just to move 1 percentage point. This is unbelievable. That's why we've been, once again, at the top of the country. And you're gonna hear me say in a little bit that we're above the national average significantly now. But this is exactly, if you look at the trajectory on even all of these different groups, and you look at KCTCS specifically, KCTCS has outpaced all of our community college colleagues around the country and the growth, but all of our institutions have grown significantly in this area. And just once again, if you move it 1 percentage point, think about how big of a percent that is. If you move it 14%, 15 percentage points, that's absolutely unreal, right? So, our retention, if someone ever told me that Kentucky would be at an 80% retention rate, when I took over this enrollment management, student success stuff at EKU back in 1997, EKU was at 51% with a 26% graduation rate. What are you now?
80% retention, 56% graduation.
Yeah. So bottom line, this is, another, y'all know retention is first to second year period, right? At the same institution. There's some reports we have, if you want to look at it, in detail about employment, everything else, we'll have it here for you. You want any of that? I just put it on here screen to let you know we can get that to you. The thing that we do are data. And so we have as many of those as you want. Now, the next slide will get to just let you know where we're at. If you see this orange, that's the national average on the screen. This is where Kentucky is at on 6-year completion rates. Number 2 in the country. Utah, I don't know where they found their 3 people from, but they beat us this past year. So we'll get it next time. On retention rates, number 1 in the country, significantly higher than our second person coming to us. Look at the national average, you see where we're at. I mean, yes.
This is not, probably not like a dumb question.
Never.
So it's good. We put a lot of safety nets in for students to make sure they're successful. How do we know we're not? Where's the protection for the grades and the class and assessment that we're not just moving kids along instead?
You know what? 2 answers, neither one of them are complete. One is that what we hope is our regional accreditors and others ensure a quality piece to that conversation. How do we know? If you're asking me, do we have grade inflation or not? Can't prove it. Don't know how to answer that. So I'm saying I don't have a great answer for you. The item that I will talk about here in a little bit, I'm leading to that hopefully, is that's why I think we need a proxy for a quality metric. One is, once again, not everybody, I'm gonna say we're gonna push this because we come to the table as a statewide representative to you. And we're going to push that we have a workforce metric that says how many of the students that we're getting through on our campuses are working in Kentucky.
Yeah.
And to me, that is a proxy for a statewide quality metric. Do they have the competencies? We've done some other things, like we talk to employers, we have a graduate profile that employers told us that that are quality for them, that they want to see us do. All of our campuses now, 4 and 2 year, are incorporating all that all those 10 essential skills in all their programs, and general education, our whole general education policy will be around that. So we're doing stuff on the back end with the campuses to ensure that we are putting those competencies in place that employers want and that students will recognize that they have when they go out and sell themselves. Right? And there's a lot of mechanics we're going to do. We need a better a co-curricular transcript, needs a better way of badging so people will know that they have those going. So there's some internal working orders, but your question, I think, is exactly the question that I think we need to, as a performance funding work group, saying what can we do to ensure there's a quality element to our work.
I think one thing we have to recognize for our policymakers around the table, that the academic readiness of an incoming freshman today is something we need to be looking at, because taking them from where they are to walking across that stage takes an investment from the institutions today that is a paramount, hill to climb in a lot of ways. And so as we look at the spending on our campuses, student support services is the fastest growing. Angie's budget officer, yeah, I mean, you can see head nods around here. Student support services is where the investment is to help them get from where they are to where they want to be. And so I think we need to take a good assessment, Aaron, of where they're at when they come in and where they're at when they come out.
And this is, once again, we're going long in this, but I think these are the right questions to ask. I worry about the students coming to us now more than ever. And not just academically. I worry about them in all those categories that causes students to not go and to drop out. And that has to be something that you may not can do it in this model, Senator McDaniel, but we're gonna have to talk about what does that mean when we connect truly a P20 process in this, because whatever we're putting out there now, we get what we get. That's why these guys are tired of hearing me argue that we can no longer talk about students being ready for us. We're going to be ready for the students we get. And that's a different conversation than we've had in our ed.
So I know we gotta move on, but if I could briefly follow your statement about academic readiness, President Biden. Respectfully, I think our institutions hold a bit of control on the volume of that with your acceptance rate, do you not? Now, I understand academic readiness and acceptance rate are two different things. But I would presume I can dial up my acceptance rate of applicants and get more students enrolled. And that drives the perception that it doesn't really matter if you're ready or not. Institution XYZ in Kentucky is gonna take you. Now, that's gonna hammer our retention, that's gonna hammer our graduation. And hopefully the institution via the formula suffers for decisions where they dialed it up.
Very delicate balance. Remember that, high school GPAs today are, when you look at grade inflation, it's not just in the university classroom. So when we say when there's instability and the standardized assessment tools that are used, if those are used for admittance or they just used for scholarships. When we think about the fact that the college going rate in Kentucky is not moving up, it's moving down. You saw the data on first generation and low income students. We're serving more than we ever have before. But most disproportionately impacted for academic readiness when it comes to those those first gen low income students. It is a delicate balance. You're right. We could cut off that opportunity, but I think that we've made a commitment to trying to wrap around and saying, can we catch them up? What is the gap may not be that they don't understand algebra. That may not be the gap. The gap may be that they were that their home life was one that didn't support them prioritizing algebra over having a safe place to sleep, having food to eat, or having clothes. And so I think that it's a delicate balance, but I think it's mission for us as public institutions in the state. We hear frequently from policymakers that serving our Kentuckians, it should be our first priority. And I think that, every one of us prioritizes that work. So I hear what you're saying, but I think in order to achieve our goals, 60/40 and all those things, we've got to invest in those two.
And so to move on, I'm gonna let you do jump in.
Well, I was just gonna say, the model rewards these universities, the way I understand it, for the raw number of graduates. And so they have to have a bigger pool to keep increasing those raw number of graduates, because they have to perform against themselves. So if they have 1,000 graduates this year, they have to keep that pool wide open so they can have 1,100 next year for the performance-based funding model, because you got to keep performing against yourself and getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, because we're trying to get to 60% of the total population. So you need raw numbers. So actually, I would argue that if our driving North Star is to 60/30, and you're rewarding raw numbers, having a tougher acceptance rate would actually penalize those opportunities. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think that's a conflict we have with our goals and our model.
Great point. If I could respond briefly. I think the word you use of delicate balance is the exact right phrase, because you can turn I would presume. What would be fascinating if we could spend 2 hours on the algorithms for universities accepting students, and then the processes by which I would presume AI is involved in the conversation.
Yeah, and we can do that.
No, we don't have the 2 hours.
No, I'm not saying today, but we can do that.
It would be fascinating, because you dial it too far this way and suddenly you got a bunch of students that can't matriculate through. Or you dial it too far this way, suddenly you don't have enough warm bodies in the seats and you got to lay off professors and close buildings.
Yeah.
Where do you find that balance? And I would presume you can, without stereotyping, you can see the path a student has traveled and say, the likelihood of this student making it through our system is high. And we want to try to attract this student with some extra incentives to get him or her here, as opposed to this student having traveled this life pathway through this institution of high school XYZ that has consistently put out academically underprepared students. I would presume the knowledge and data is out there to crunch down to that level. Nobody's nodding their head yes or no, but
We do have that data, and I will say this, and then I know we got other stuff. Got to say this. That's why our institutions has to be ready, because if we went with 60/30, putting people in the workforce, we're just going to have a harder time now. in higher education than we've ever had. So that's my argument. That's gonna be my argument why you need to have certain kinds of funding that goes to building that student success infrastructure that's gonna help students get through, because if it is about the workforce, but we have data that we can show you if you make this input, what it would do, what it won't do. Yeah.
I can just add, you're exactly right, as far as we could cut the tail and our graduation rate could go up, but that's not what Kentucky needs. And so what you've got are the institutions are investing more and more into student aid to make sure it's affordable, as well as student support to make sure they're successful.
That's right. And to move on, so we're a high aid state, but can't have, and even though we left 58 million of Pell dollars last year on the table, it's another story for another day. But our campuses are given more in aid than federal and state aid put together. This is where we're at on persistence rate, so I'll move on. We're number one in the country again. You see where we're at by national average. You can tell we're above national average on all the elements. If the next slide will show, and I'm done with this. The next slide will show that 6 out of every 10 diverse students graduating, I said earlier, with no debt, period. And Ryan, I think you're 75%.
Right on it. Just a shot.
Yeah, so we are an affordable state by relative comparison, especially to our low income. The last slide will just give you some of just the big items that we have that we sent out there. The item that we don't do very well, we don't talk in state about our success as much as we should. Nationally, we're recognized for it. I give speeches on it every week somewhere. We need to somehow be able to tell that story. I know we're gonna run out of time for this. With that, HCM, are you on the line?
Yes, sir, we are.
All right, we catch you. These folks are chatty today, so we'll blame them. We're gonna let you jump into it. Introduce yourself if you wouldn't mind.
That's totally understandable. We've been listening attentively. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tom Allison. I'm a director at HCM Strategists. We are a national consulting firm dedicated to state higher education policy, many of the topics you've been discussing today. I'm joined by my colleagues, Rachel Rivas and Martha Snyder. And if it's okay with you, just given the time, I think I'm just going to jump right into our prepared presentation, if that's okay with the group.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
These guys aren't shy about asking questions through the process.
Right. That's completely understandable. So just want to confirm everyone can see my screen.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. So we've been charged with providing this national landscape of higher education funding formulas. We've worked in dozens of states over the years in the history of our firm, doing these sorts of updates that and reviews that the Commonwealth is conducting right now to building formulas and systems from the ground up. So we are going to talk a little bit about sort of the national landscape, big picture, how many states have incorporated models and what percentage of their total funding is dedicated to performance. And then we're going to introduce some concepts of sort of best practices, what we call the balanced framework to higher education funding, many of which Kentucky is already active in, but we are going to point to how some other states have implemented some of the best practices of the balance framework, which, as you see here, are recognizing and funding core costs, enrollment, progression and outcomes, and also recognizing different missions of institutions. So as I already introduced myself, I'm Tom. Rachel's going to kick in about halfway through this conversation. So just to begin, about 35 states, so the majority of states have some sort of performance funding formula. Most of those, they tend to be in the 2-year sector rather than the 4-year sector. But 24 states have performance funding in both sectors. So that would, Kentucky would fall into that category. There's, of course, a huge variation in the types of metrics that states use, how they weight them, the size of each component. and also the approach to how funding is actually allocated. There's a few different sort of buckets that we've attempted to sort institutions in. But as you can see on this pie chart, 40% of states allocate less than 5% of their total funding based on performance. Now, that would include the states that have zero performance funding at all. About 30% spend about between 5 to 25% of their total funding based on performance. And about 30% spend more than 25%. And according to this particular methodology, Kentucky would fall into that 30% in the teal. So as I mentioned, there's this huge variation in different metrics and weights, but there's also a pretty significant variation in the approach or the actual model mechanics. So this table is meant to summarize those approaches, though there are some details along the way that make it a little problematic. But the first is share of outcomes, and this is one that Kentucky, for the most part, follows. You count up and weight all the given metrics, such as number of degrees produced. If that institution, let's say institution A, produces 15% of all outcomes, then it would receive 15% of OBF funds. There are some complicating factors that can get in the way in that, such as the way Kentucky runs all of your funding through the model, but there's still only 115 million up for grabs. And with your hold harmless, you essentially have some institutions that are not eligible for funding, even though they're producing some of those outcomes. But this is generally a pretty common approach. Ohio is another good example. And we can provide more sort of pros and cons. I'm not sure if we're gonna have time to go through all of them, but it is essentially a zero-sum game. So you can lose funding from year to year, even if you've increased your performance, and that's if another institution is doing better. That brings us to relative growth, because we just had a good conversation between performance and outcomes. And so with relative growth, like in the case in Tennessee, funding is based on how much an institution improves over its own baseline, but it's still relative to other institutions' improvement. So an example here is kind of a rosy example. Institution A improves its outcomes by 10%. The other institutions in the state improve 0 to 5%. So that is essentially going to result in institution A receiving a larger share of the OBF than it did last year. But this is not necessarily, in all cases, just because you improve off of your own baseline, guarantee increased funding. It's still compared to how the other institutions are doing. The sort of third approach is target-based, like we see in Florida. Funding is based on whether an institution reaches set targets for its outcomes. And that target could either be excellence or it could be improvement. Those are usually negotiated between the state agency and the institutions. And the example here is, the performance funding amount might be preset. And if institution A achieves 90% of its target, again, that could be on excellence or improvement, then it receives 90% of its designated OBF funding. Now, if they exceed that target, they don't receive any additional funding because that funding is sort of preset. And I think that is a good indicator, just a reminder that as long as state budgets are finite, at the end of the day, increasing funding for one institution often means a reduction for others. There are some ways to smooth that out. But often, we are dealing with a finite pot of funds. There is a fourth approach that we could have added here that's basically a rate-based approach. This is what we see in Texas with their community college finance model, and might end up being their 4-year model as well, where the state negotiates a rate. Let's just say a bachelor's degree is going to be worth $1,000 for the institution. So it's sort of like an entitlement, not unlike Medicaid or SNAP or something like that. The problem is state budgets are finite, and you often can run into budgetary constraint issues like we're seeing in Texas. So just want to pause there. That's a lot of information, but just wanted to see if there's any initial reactions to these broad approaches and how states look at performance.
Open up the floor, but I do want to tell you, all of this material will be put on this dedicated website that we have for you. So you have any questions that y'all have. Yes, sir.
Different states, Tom, have different means for accounting for funds that flow outside of the model, and they can take all different forms. Are there some examples of how other states account for those other flows relative to their model?
To clarify, are we talking about perhaps tuition revenue or endowment funds or things outside the state budget?
Take for examples, okay? We give money to individual universities for buildings, right?
Yeah.
Or one I can think of that Representative Tipton was involved in is the regional universities receive an appropriate, there's an on behalf of payment relative to their pension obligations that does not extend to the flagships necessarily, right? And so those are just the two that come to my mind the quickest right now. Is there an accounting for those in some of these models?
I'd say yes. We certainly see a lot of provisos in state budgets. Certain carve outs for institutions to provide certain things. I think when dealing with a formula, many times those provisos are sort of folded in. Many states will go through a process where they'll try to remove some of those provisos if they're implementing a new formula. But something like capital or financial aid, for the most part, I would consider those separate from this formula conversation, as we're mainly talking about general operating dollars.
Thank you.
I would like to just point out that Kentucky's model, actually, I would say is a combination of those first two approaches, share of outcomes and relative growth. Our model is, when it comes down to it, yes, it is a share of the outcomes, and growth is therefore rewarded, but it does two things. It's always trying to strive for equilibrium. So the model itself is going to take into consideration the existing base funding that an institution has. So we've got examples of institutions that have grown but haven't received performance dollars because right now, based on what they're producing, it's not at the same average level. It's not at equilibrium. It's not at that same level as other institutions in the model.
A couple of mine are in that category.
Yeah, we have target base could fix that,
Yes, I'll
yes.
say fix, but
Yeah,
address
yes,
that concern.
yes, it would, because you're basing it off your own base.
Right.
Your growth.
It is always difficult trying to sort some of these ideas perfectly, and I think you're absolutely right that many states incorporate multiple approaches into their model.
That's
Just-
gonna be a decision point that we'll make with small school adjustments and a variety of things. So, we have one other question here first. But, yeah.
So if 35 states have performance funding, which of the allocation approaches are most common, and which states do you perceive as most effective in terms of outcomes, in terms of graduation rates, et cetera?
So I think share of outcomes is most common, followed closely by relative growth, and target is really kind of only Florida. I don't think that the approach necessarily is what drives a successful formula. I think whether the metrics are aligned with the state goal, whether the size of the performance pool is large enough to pay attention for the institutions to pay attention to. So because there's really is just a lot of variation between these, and that is a decent segue in terms of what we consider best practices, sort of what a good effective formula should look like. I'd say as a firm, we're probably agnostic on these three approaches in terms of effectiveness, and it kind of just depends on what works for the state.
Got a quick question on the target base. So, for example, University of Florida hits all these targets. There's got to get a preset number out there, like they can achieve up to $10 million. So if they hit 90%, they get 9 million. What happens to the maybe does it go to the rainy day fund? Does it roll over year to year? Does it go into an unawarded pool? Like, how do they treat the unclaimed dollars in the target model?
That's a great question. Along with answering that question, is the money reoccurring to the base or reoccurring to the pool?
So I will have to double check on what happens with the unspent. Let's say in that one example, that the 10% that isn't awarded. I will have to check that. But my understanding is that the performance pool is always reverts back to itself, not to the institutions from year to year. Dr. Thompson, if that answered your second question.
It did answer my question, but I'd be anxious to, if y'all wouldn't mind looking into his question, because I think that I would be anxious to know that answer too.
Yeah, we will. I don't know off the top of my head, but happy to follow up.
Tom, this is Bill Payne. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I've got a question about that target-based approach, because Kentucky actually tried that back in a 2013, 2014 timeframe. And my question is, who sets those targets? Is it done by a state agency? Is it done by the General Assembly in Florida? Is it set by the institution? Is it negotiated between the state agency and the institution? And how difficult is it to set those targets?
So the Florida universities are governed by a pretty centralized governing board. So they have, to begin with, a good amount of discretion and governance power on their own. But in order to set those targets, and again, for some of them, they were excellence targets. Other ones were growth because, University of Florida, Gainesville, very high graduation rate. There's not a lot of ceiling left for them to go to improve, right? So they, had these targets for excellence. The institutions that, were comprehensive, middle of the road, 40-50% graduation rates, let's say, they're never going to catch up with Gainesville, but they wanted to recognize their improvement. So it was a good amount. My understanding, it was a lot of negotiation between the centralized governing board and the institutions themselves. We've done some desk research on that experience, but we certainly weren't in the room. But from what we can ascertain, it was a good amount of time and negotiation between the governing board and the institutions themselves.
There was, I've talked to Ray Rodriguez. I know the answer to that question. It took a little time. But the other places have either a coordinating board bill or whether the legislature gives them that. You can move on, sir.
Great. So again, when we think about some of the best practices that we've seen, we see sort of three primary aspects in a state system, regardless again of the approach or the specific metrics. But we think you should, any given finance system should advance the state's strategic goal. We've already talked about your North Star, 60 by 30, centering on student needs and success. So, we do want to have a lot of student-focused metrics and metrics that recognize different students' abilities and backgrounds. But we also want to align with institutional cost drivers, just to recognize the varying costs, both between mission, level, discipline, et cetera. So when we think about a strong post-secondary finance system, we look at these three principles right here. And many of this is based on our report, a balanced framework for state higher education funding, which the link is here. And so that'll be available for the group. But essentially, there are sort of four components of the balance framework. And those are core costs, which you can imagine are sort of fixed costs that are required for an institution to operate. Imagine it being completely separate from enrollment, just to keep the lights on. You might need to pay taxes. Every institution needs a bursar, et cetera. So really just kind of sort of minimal thrifty costs to keep an institution running regardless of its size. Next would be enrollment, and this is a variable cost associated with the student population. Next comes progression and outcomes. So actually looking at student success, and then mission differentiation, adjustments that support differences in institutional mission. Either sort of it could be at the beginning of the formula, the end, or incorporated in the middle throughout through different weights and adjustments. I just say that Kentucky already engages in all four of those components. Your maintenance and operations part of your formula that accounts for 10% of the formula overall. We would consider that in the core cost component here in the light orange. The 20% that goes towards academic support and institutional support, many of those are based on the enrollment of your institution. So there's another 20% there. And then the lion's share, about 70%, based on the student success metrics that you have. You have mission support adjustments sort of throughout. And I'll leave this chart for you all perhaps to pursue. If you wanted to compare Louisiana, Nevada, the Oregon 2-year and 4-year sectors and the Texas 2-year sectors, just to give an idea of the variation. But we are going to go through each of the components and sort of, hone in on what Kentucky does in those components, but then also offer some food for thought for additional metrics or additional adjustments based on the survey, based on the initial conversations that you've had so far. And so with that, I'm gonna pass the microphone over to my colleague Rachel, who's going to go through each of the components, how Kentucky currently does it, and then some other state practices to consider.
I do want to point out from the last slide quickly that we do take into some account in the student success metric with weights, the M&O, student cost, and a variety of other things. So even though it's not listed there, we are taking that into account. Other thing on the Texas 2-year model, they get also community funding and not just state funding. So I just want to make sure that everybody understands those are not apples to apples, but where the money is coming from.
Yep.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Rachel?
Yeah, so we'll walk through each of these components and we'll talk about a few state examples, but just so you know, there's going to be time in the future as well to maybe do deeper dives on some of these states. So we might not have those here. We'll kind of just touch on them briefly, but we can always do that at a future meeting. So just starting with our core costs, as Tom said, this really supports the fixed operating costs of running an institution. So administrative expenses, buildings and maintenance, those kind of things. And the purpose is to provide a stable floor for those fixed costs and also to recognize that there are differences in operations and maintenance that aren't entirely driven by enrollment. So it's not always about the size. You are always going to have that sort of fixed cost associated with running an institution. So, as we mentioned, Kentucky does have that maintenance and operations allocation. So already kind of incorporating core cost into the formula. I think in many ways, the small school adjustment and the community needs index that we see are also adjusting for core costs because it's like you're withholding that money from the formula. So it's kind of creating a base. And then, of course, Kentucky has, a funding floor and hold harmless protections that are also protecting that sort of core cost, that base. Other institutions might have just like a minimum dollar amount per institution. So it's a little different than funding floor slightly. Or other adjustments. That minimum amount might be adjusted for the size of the institution, for where the institution is located, or other mission specific differentiation. Actually, we'll go to the next slide. I think we have a little more examples here. Thank you. So again, some states do that guaranteed minimum amount. So it's providing an allocation for core costs regardless of enrollment. But in these examples, like California, for example, it's very, very small because most of their formula is based on enrollment. So it's kind of, it is a primarily enrollment-based formula with a little bit of outcomes. And so that, that small amount is usually like about 10 million or so per district, not per institution, is really just to protect some allocation to those institutions that isn't going to be based on enrollment. So it's kind of different than what Kentucky has as the funding floor. It's a much higher amount that you set for that funding floor. But it's kind of the same purpose, right? It creates some stability, knowing that institutions will have at least that minimum amount. But of course, funding floors can be, time specific. If they're from a few years ago, they might not have cost of living adjustments. So sometimes that has to be built into that policy when you're making that. Another way to do core cost funding is to basically set two different pools. So there's like a base funding allocation and then a performance funding allocation, and they are separate. So a couple of states do this. Actually, I think quite a few states do this. But for example, like Hawaii, it's a very small amount of money. It's like less than 1% of their total funds is just for performance. So it ends up not being a huge incentive for those institutions, but it does protect their base. They always have their base funding and they're just kind of allocating that performance pool through the formula. And lastly, just like one final approach to this kind of core cost is some states set aside a portion of their formula based on the previous year's allocation. So like Louisiana, for example, 50% of their formula is based on whatever they got the previous year, which includes the performance funding allocation. So it is a way to potentially like incrementally increase and roll that performance funding into the base. Yeah, but it's not necessarily as stable as the funding floor that Kentucky already has, I would say. All right. So enrollment, I think enrollment's pretty straightforward. So this is just about the variable cost of instruction and student support based on how many students are actually enrolled. As you mentioned, Kentucky does have like an allocation for FTE enrollment. So you obviously have an enrollment component in the formula. There's also the institutional support that's based on spending on instruction and student services. And that's kind of enrollment based as well, because if you have more students enrolled, that's going to be a higher allocation. Other states sometimes weight that enrollment. I think it's kind of Kentucky kind of does that with the adult learners. The student credit hours are weighted. But you could also weight the FTE enrollment. In some cases, Texas does that. There's also weighted enrollment based on program or field of study. So if the program costs more to deliver, it could have a weight on it to account for that additional cost for the enrollment in those programs. I think we're good on enrollment. Next, progression and outcomes. So that's really the main purpose of the outcomes-based funding formula. This is what we talk about a lot, actually, is what types of metrics you include in these outcomes-based components of the formula. So we've broken them down into like 3 different buckets. So you have your progression metrics. So that's like retention or credit milestones. Your completion metrics include, degrees awarded, they could be graduation rates. And then post-completion metrics, so like job placement, wages, transfer, if you have community colleges like transferring out. So Kentucky obviously has both of these already. The course completion allocation is on those credit milestones. And then the student success allocations based on degrees completed. The formula also for Kentucky does have those components for low income and first generation completions, and also for STEM plus H. So you're focusing on those underserved populations and also those high priority degree programs. So just some other practices from other states is incorporating those post-completion outcomes, which Kentucky currently does not have. And also doing any sort of metrics or adjustments for high priority programs. You already have STEM plus H, but there's other ways to do that. Actually, can we go to the next slide? This one has more detail on both of those. So really thinking about how do you incorporate those workforce and talent metrics, which I think we heard from a lot of you in the surveys. So one way to do that is to have those completion metrics in the formula, things like job placement. And that can be job placement in the state as well, if you're really trying to prioritize, retaining individuals in the field and working in Kentucky after graduation. So some states currently do job placement. There's also wages and earnings. So, how much do they earn after graduating? Kind of combining that is ROI, so return on investment. Are they better off for having gone through this program and graduated, making the wages they are based on how much they paid to attend? And Arkansas recently implemented that in their funding formula. The other approach here is weighting either student credit hours or degrees or enrollment in those high priority programs that align with state goals. And we've kind of broke these down into 3 different ways to do that. One is if it's cost based. So it's weighting the programs that cost more to produce. So it's like STEM, fine arts degrees usually cost a lot more. But another way to sort of pick those programs is market-based. So weighting the programs that are high demand based on like a labor market analysis. So what does the state actually need, or state or regions need to be produced? And then we also have strategy-based, which is similar. It's weighting programs that are of interest to the state, but they may not be necessarily based on market demand. So I think right now Kentucky sort of fits in that category with the STEM plus H, because these are high wage. In many cases, they lead to high demand careers, but it's not necessarily, you're not necessarily changing which programs qualify based on the labor market analysis.
Yes, we have a question. I do want to point out before Senator Gibbons, the way we do our student progression, we do have a cost-based piece already included in the model that we're using, by the way. Senator Gibbons, go ahead, sir.
Rachel, thank you for the presentation. Speaking specifically to the post-completion metrics component, to the degree that you have knowledge, expound just a little bit more on how a state, actually go back to the slide you had up. That a state like West Virginia that has job placement and wages and earnings, is the algorithm for that metric going to be along the lines of, obviously the student graduates from a public institution in West Virginia. The student stays in the state of West Virginia and is employed. Help me to separate out the student that goes to work at a fast food chain post-graduation versus a student that goes into a consulting role with HCM strategies and makes a lot of money. How does the state differentiate between that? Is that the wages earnings piece? Help me to understand.
Well, HCM is a virtual firm. Hopefully they're allowed to stay in West Virginia and still pay West Virginia taxes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Rachel, if it's okay, if I could just step in, there is a data infrastructure issue here. Most states rely on their state unemployment insurance wage file to understand whether the student is employed and working in the state and what their quarterly earnings are. So there are some blind spots there. Some states just sort of accept that blind spot. Other states have pursued connections with the U.S. Census Bureau that connects all of those UI wage records for all 50 states. Ohio is an example of that have actually incorporated the PSEO wages from other states, and there's some other sort of ways to understand out-of-state wages too. If I understood that question, I feel like it was mainly about how to capture interstate mobility.
A little bit of that, but not so much interstate mobility as if we had a magic wand and could capture the data, it would really be, we're wanting to measure the fact that a graduate from institution XYZ contributes to his or her community. Not just earning wages, but volunteering, helping lift up the community. But those are so hard to measure, we can't measure those. So we revert back to the things we can find data on, which I presume is going to be, are they employed and are they earning above X?
Yeah, I can answer a piece of this because we just had a meeting on this. That some of that data is squishy, and I would warn us not to go in some of those areas to find out if they're in a particular job based on their major, the amount of money. We can tell you if they're working in the state, what we're employed, and how much money they're making. We have that. We have the best data system in the country. What we don't have, West Virginia and other people are experiencing this, we don't have an enhanced UI wage data. To do that, we're probably gonna have to come to you all and say, we need to get a bill. That then employers can put those SOC codes in where you can get directly to your answer. So right now, the data that's used when you try to say, if you get a degree, and the great thing we've done in Kentucky with Futurity and with KY Stats, we can identify all the jobs that are available, even if you're a sociology major. What we can't do necessarily is to find out exactly if you're going to work for Ashland and Oil and you're an accountant, it's going to look right now, you're doing oil, which you're really an accountant, right? So to really do that, we're going to have an enhanced UI system. And we can get that, but we're probably going to need some legislation to help us.
But you can tell how much they're earning.
We can tell you how much they're earning.
Well,
It's all
if I can say, I don't know about now, but at one time I know we did track that they were working in the field of study. And
You
we tracked that.
can do that, but some areas are so large. So we have UI data.
Job placement.
We have that. We have everything you get other than the enhanced fees. And that gives you in a directed area. So for me, what I like the idea is, are we keeping our people in the state working once they get a degree, right? But you're asking for.
So I don't want to take more time than we should, because I know we got to stay on schedule. But you've indicated a real interest in folding this into the formula in some fashion. You've said it
Very
publicly,
much so. I think
privately.
it should be a proxy
You've
quality
been-
metric.
Sure, so I'll belabor the point just a little bit. Are we inappropriately, and maybe I'm not clear in my understanding, but are we inappropriately trying to incent our public institutions to keep a student in state?
To work,
To work,
I would hope so.
you would hope so.
I would hope that
So-
we are able to
so-
bring out-of-state students in. We could get to 40 to 45% of them staying in state to add to our economy.
I'm not, and maybe I'm not phrasing my question perfect. From a taxpayer perspective.
Yeah.
The best thing, and please forgive me for saying this out loud, but I think from a taxpayer perspective, the best thing that could happen is a student is educated elsewhere at someone else's cost, and they come home and boom, we got them.
But we'll count that in our educational attainment if they come in the state.
I'm for counting it.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if, as we go forward on this conversation, if there are any anomalies that we need to think about.
Hey, sorry to take up time, but I think you've raised a good point. Let me give you my premise on this quickly. My argument is that if we can somehow get an educated workforce to supply just not the needs of what people have now, employers, but that we can build that workforce for employers to come in. If we can get employers to come in, we could then stop shipping so many engineers out, as an example. So my argument is that we want an educated workforce, not only to handle the economic development we got going, but to build the future of economic. So I do want those people to come in and stay here and work, even if we educated them or not. But bottom line, if we get them into our institution and we want them, then I want them to stay in the state as much as possible to help the economy. One, we have little control over, I think, from our end. And one, and the other one, we have little control.
Thank you, not disagreeing with you, just trying to process.
A lot of considerations for sure. So I think, Rachel, did you want to take us home with mission differentiation?
Sure, and we can spend more time on this in the future. This is one of those ones that maybe we spend more time on in the future, especially since it's one of your principles. The mission differentiation component just ensures that there's no one size fit fits all for every institution. There's adjustments so that institutions receive funding based on their strengths and their mission. So Kentucky already does like sector differentiation. There's, different pools and different metrics between the universities and KCTCS. The small school adjustment is another sort of mission differentiation because it's different based on, research versus regional and KSU. And then you have the research university weights. Those are all kind of ways that mission differentiation is currently built into the formula. But there are other ways to do that and things we might want to explore in the future. Having different weights and metrics between the flagships and the regional. So kind of within that 4-year sector, can you have different metrics like maybe for graduate degrees? There's also having institution-specific metrics. Not necessarily a best practice, but some states like Florida and Rhode Island, each institution kind of selects a metric that they want to be measured on based on their mission and their priorities. And then there's sometimes research specific allocations, like a pot of money that's just eligible for research. So that way, you don't necessarily have to do all these weights and all these other advantages to the research universities because they have their own pot of money for those activities. And there can also be like rural serving designations. Colorado recently did like a thriving institution designation. So those are kind of new on the horizon, thinking about like how do you support rural communities and regional access. So yeah, I think that's it. And then I think our last slide is just things that we can talk about in the future. And so we definitely want to hear back from all of you about if there's anything else we can bring back to this group. Adequacy, affordability, how to incorporate graduate degrees in, and how do we also continue thinking about the difference between those research institutions and the comprehensives and supporting that mission differentiation.
You all, if you get, please, 2 things from this. They will be with us the rest of our time, so they're here to answer our questions or to provide us with more information in greater detail. If you want to think about that and then ask us to give them that ask, then we're happy to do that. They're going to be with us the entire time. For the rest of the day, we're running a little bit behind the rest of the day. We're going to pop up some proposed goals. And
Dr. Thompson, before you move on,
yes, sir.
can we get a copy of that PowerPoint? And then for future meetings, if they could give those to us a day or 2 in advance so we could start dissecting them and read ahead, I think that would be very beneficial.
Yeah, we will do that. It's posted to that dedicated website. Have we sent that out to everybody? It hasn't been, but it will be. But you're right, Leader Rudy, we want to get stuff to you as early as possible. And anything you ask for here, we'll do it. If you got things that you want within the next week or so, would you all mind giving it to us so we can get it early enough? Because they have to run all this stuff and do the work, so we can get it to you. Okay. We've got some state goal we have to get you all to get it on.
No. So, yeah, put it straight, you put it,
Oh, we're fine.
go back. And you go ahead and do that too.
Okay. That's gonna take a minute. I apologize. I was not.
What you have in front of you, these are your current stated goals that all those that had a chance to look at it, you got some input on. It was something that was brought to us that all the presidents basically agreed on those. We did a little word changing, definitional changes to make more sense out of it. And I can go through these fairly quickly. But then if you have a minute, we can go over some of the proposed ones. And then we were going to ask you to take this back and bring to us where you want to go with it. What we got?
If you can
Okay.
talk and then I'll get it up.
Okay, well, the first one is retention and progression. This was the goal. Current language, you'll see that no language was revised based on where we were going. Degree and credential production. We felt that the language and what's going to work with HCM, got feedback from different people. We felt like this was not needed to change. Targeted degrees and credential What was suggested is that we remove, STEM H and broaden it to maybe address more workforce alignment and talent development. That would be a part of it, obviously, but, you know, expand that to a broader way of looking at how we're adding particular jobs to Kentucky. Achievement gaps, I've got some recommended changes. There's more than just achievement gaps. This one was stated before, but they're just gaps. We have opportunity gaps, we have access gaps, and we have completion gaps. All of those exist, and that could take into account population groups that, like adult learners, traditional age groups, and a variety of other items. So even though it's not on here, I'm suggesting that we take achievement out of it, because we're going to have to do a better job of recruiting more students and letting them know their access to college and so on to get in the pipeline. So closing gaps, I would recommend that we change it from achievement gaps to just closing gaps. And that way we can look at access, we can look at opportunity, we can look at completion as a whole. Achievement gaps usually just indicate how well they're doing academically. You can get to point A to point B on some of the particular student success metrics. But there's some things that we need to do in working with our K-12 populations and adult learners to get them in the pipeline. Transfer pathways, we think that we should include private institution in addition to public, and maybe simplify the language. If they transfer somewhere and get that degree, then, you know, maybe some credit should be given. We also believe that if they go from 4 to 4 and they complete any of those items, as we think about transfer pathways, this mainly applies to KCTCS, but also 4-year institutions. So if a goal we have around transfers, we're asking that we expand that a little more to include private, because we account them in our attainment numbers. Oh, yes. Do we,
Those are the current ones.
those are the current ones.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
I have
yeah.
one thing, Dr. Thompson.
Yes,
The first page is Dr. Thompson just said, those are the current goals, and we're recommending very few changes. And most of our campus presidents indicated that they did not want to make changes to those, but they are codified in statute. They're part of 164.092. So I just wanted to make that clear. Those are already out there in the performance funding statute for the state of Kentucky.
and we have time to get some feedback on these current ones before we go into proposed one. I know Heather's giving me a time, I got it, 8 minutes. We're blaming technology for holding us up, by the way. Any comments on these or what I've even said?
So would you define for me non-traditional age?
Right now, we count, this is a very good question. I want to, right now it's 25 and older. That's the top to 64, that working age population. That's the way it's defined at a national level. However, in Kentucky, we have a significant amount of people that are between 20 and 25 that got children or taking care of parents.
I just think that needs some visitation at some point when we have a little bit more time, particularly in light of some things that we've seen in the last session too.
Yeah, well, I think you're right, but this is where that CPE comes into play a little bit, where again, we can define those parameters with that in mind. That was just the population group pick that we had about 650, what I call eligible people to come back to us. That's where we got those parameters from at that time. And it makes it easier for national comparison. Other feedback on this. By the way, I've got the comprehensive campuses have given me a proposal. I'm going to start sending around since we're out of time of what theirs. Representative McCool and others have asked, what are you all thinking about? And let me tell you, the next performance funding work group, we're in all of this, right? Fully. So I'm going to send this around, you know, and research institution may be bringing something, but the comprehensives have gotten together and come up with some thoughts and some ideas, and anything that y'all want to say about it before we get more on the goals. I'm just going to pass it around.
think some observation about this, though. You know, retention and progression leads to degree and credential production. Achievement gap closing leads to credentials and degree production. Transfer pathway leads to degree production. I think that one of the challenges is that a lot of, there are things you have to do to get the outcome. Right. And so I sometimes wonder if it's just a, you know, and I know there's new goals on the back here. How do we kind of make all this work in a formula that says really what we're looking for is finish, a credential or a degree? And I guess we're trying to reward these behaviors, I suppose, but I don't know how we measure that, when really what we say is, hey, you took a lot of transfer students, but did they finish? Or you took a lot of dual credit, you did a lot more dual credit, but did they come to you and did they finish? You know, Ryan disproportionately educates a lot of dual credit students. We finished. That's the nature of these. So.
Well, and I think a part of the conversation, we've got decision points we're gonna have to make. We ran out of time today, but I had a slide that says, over the next week, we're gonna have to make, there's some decision points. Do we wait? Do we not wait? Do we count dual credit? We don't count dual credit as part of it. There's a lot of decision points that we're gonna have to make to get to some of your point here, right? You know, but each one of these goals have a particular metric that can be assigned to it. Just remember that, you know, and so if you're trying to measure to make sure that they are doing certain things based on whether we go with a target and goals, whether we go with outcomes or whatever, those matter. So when you think of these goals, you have to understand that we're going to probably be we're going to decide on a metric that goes with those goals.
Aaron, could I make a comment on that? Because I think it's important. It's Tim Caboni, if you can't see me. You know, we said a core principle is being outcomes focused. And I think you look at the list of things on that page, and some of them are, but many of them are not. And so if a core principle is that it's really going to be outcomes driven, I want to stick to that as much as possible. Because I think that's where you get to a good model that does the signaling and creates the incentive.
Tim, can I ask for maybe me telling what I heard and tell me if you're on target?
So this is what I'm thinking.
Outcomes based, there are, I mean, in the end, what do you get at, right?
Yep.
When you think of an incomes based or an intervening variable such as transfer, right? I mean, there's an outcome to that and there's an income to that. Outcome is if it goes from Ryan, that's an outcome for him. Goes to you, that's an income. Now, what you do with it later on. So you're saying leave out in your mind that middle piece of when they come to you.
And I think we should have that conversation around all the different goals and metrics that we've selected as we have the conversation. Because where you get the strength is an outcomes-based model. If you're rewarding inputs, that runs counter to what we've said in our principles.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. And I think I'm going to ask you all to go back and think about this or ask HCM to help us to define what some of those things are that we want to look at.
And I would think that one of the things that Caboni's talking about is about intermediate goals, right? And I've been around you all a long time. My understanding, there's some causality research associated with retention to completion, right? So I don't want to toss out intermediate goals if they've been proven to reach the outcomes we're aspiring to.
Absolutely. And once again, but these are all great questions. In the big world that I live in, student success literature and research, we are now counting persistence and retention as really outcome goals because they are great leading indicators to ultimately what you want, right? So for us, they hold within its own status an outcome process, although they are leading indicators to completion.
That's because they're annualized. They're immediate. I know retention year to year.
Yeah.
I know progression year to year. I won't know graduation for 4, 5, or 6 years.
Right.
And so they're leading indicators.
They're leading indicators that are looked upon as outcome metrics in many cases. So I hear you.
And Dr. Thompson, enrollment, progression are also major cost drivers at our campuses. And that's why we have those intermediate goals, if you will, those intermediate metrics included in the funding model, because of the cost driver aspect.
Well, one of the decision points, do we count an enrollment-based metric or we don't? These are all coming to you next time. Few quickly, I know we're out of time, Heather, but a few quickly, that people are suggesting that we think about looking at and changing. Was gonna be around dual credit. How do we do dual credit in this model? One that's not on here, but we're looking at 3-year degrees. How do we count those in this model? How do we count certain workforce outcomes that we want? Do we have a retention-based outcome in this model? Some people suggest a college attainment goal. That's our North Star, no doubt, and we assume that, but how do we incorporate it and make it clear in the model, this is the North Star that we're looking at or where we want to go? People are saying adult learners should be taken away from the way we look at it now around gaps. You know, our population group of gaps and have one on its own. That can clearly be up for discussion. I tend to think there are population groups that we have to work on ultimately, Tim, to get to the outcome that we want. And then the last one is a new affordability goal. How do we incorporate an affordability goal? Gary, I think this is coming from you and some others that feel like that's to be a part of the process. Jay, I know it came from you too. So those are some of the items that we're going to be discussing next time. I would ask you to, Travis got to say, oh yeah, we're going to establish goals next time. We've got decision points that we'll look at. Part of that is, do we have a base funding ask in this that goes, or do we keep it the way it is? All of those items we'll have a list of. And so for the next 2 minutes ago, what other items should we be bringing back? Yes.
Well, not another item. This is our third meeting. This is a very important meeting topic. I feel like we're getting to the decision points, kind of rushing through them. If 2 hours ain't enough, maybe the next meeting I'll be 3 hours to get caught up. I mean, if we got that many decision points, this is a big deal. We should not rush through these things.
Well, let me tell you what's been brought to us. You're absolutely right. We were going to send out something after this meeting, since you brought it up, just to ask you. It's been brought up to us 2 things. One is, do we extend these now from this on at least by an hour? Because I do feel like we're rushing through it. Is there a need to have an all-day retreat?
We're gonna have to do something.
Yeah,
Not enough time on.
I agree.
So both of those, I think we're gonna have to consider. I think you're absolutely right. You know, because when we get to these next meeting pieces, and we're gonna, with HCM being a part of it, we will have a lot of different questions. We only have 3 months of meetings, 3 meetings left.
Yeah, we can't.
Right. So, do we need a retreat? Or you want to start by next month, extend it in an hour and see how it goes?
You extend it an hour and have the prep materials in advance, we can move more quickly.
That's right.
But I do think when you get to decision points, that you need some time. I think that would be the day to have a long
4 hour.
sit down and say, we're gonna work through these decisions and have time for adequate discussion.
And I could do this month by month. I can have 3 hours next time. If it looks like we need more, tell you that up front.
I think we need a 4-hour meeting next month.
Next 4-hour meeting, okay. That's, I agree with that.
So we
Since
just put
I'm
an
here,
hour
I
on
got
both sides of the meeting we
right?
already got.
So,
We already got one.
September 22nd.
we're probably gonna extend that.
Let's just do it.
You know.
Noon to 4.
Yeah, the last thing I will say on this, if y'all have questions, the earlier you can give it to us for us to get it to them once again, then we can get it back to y'all early enough. But we're on a free timeline. Yes. Dr. Brown.
You know, just from the standpoint of current and proposed funding goals, I mean, there are things missing here around mission alignment, you know, particularly around graduate education, research, the different missions. So I assume we can add to these goals.
Yeah.
Finalizing the next.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, didn't get to the slide because we ran out of time. We have a decision slide where that's on there. Are we adding, are we doing, I mean, how are we looking at the mission piece, right? But yes, to answer your question without a doubt. Yes.
Everybody, this is Ron. Just a quick blurb. I think if we're trying to get to decisions as well, it's important that we have these materials at minimum 3 days in advance so that we can prepare questions to ask. I think that would be helpful for me as a president, but also have the opportunity to talk to my team here on my campus prior to the meeting.
I talked to my team this morning. Our goal, as we said this morning, we need to get you all a week ahead of time. So you can have, yes. And we will stick to that.
If I could jump in really quickly, something Bill said struck me and then I looked. So as we get ready to discuss and crystallize around funding model goals, the older goals and the newer goals, Bill Payne referenced KRS 164092. This is literally statute. We're getting ready to vote on statutory changes when we vote on these changes. So we certainly need to be, we're under a lot of pressure now to get it right, but this kind of even sets the bar just a touch higher because it's actually going to be written into state law. And so we don't want to be too flowery and wordy. We'd like broader, but we don't want to be so broad that we open the door for lots of future challenges. Just a thought, but it is verbatim. The front page is verbatim A, B, C, D, and E in the statute.
Yeah, and I'm glad Bill brought that in because any changes we vote on, we're asking you all to make statutory changes.
Leader Rudy is in charge of making sure it happens. That's why he's in charge. He left already.
We will get that stuff to you. If you have any questions for HCM, you want them to bring stuff back in greater detail on any of the states, we'll try to get some outcomes. I will tell you now, if it helps you, that with it, Kentucky is outcoming all of it. All the models, so that's what, so we are there, already. Appreciate it, folks, sorry, kept it a little longer. We will, I need a motion for adjournment. So yeah. We are adjourned.
Good.